is CNN Breaking News.
Here's the breaking news. Protests in St. Louis after an officer is found not guilty in the shooting death of a black man. You're looking at live pictures now. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Thanks for joining us. Protesters taking to the streets of St. Louis, even burning American flags, hours after a judge found a former police officer, Jason Stockley, not guilty of first-degree murder in the 2011 shooting death of a 24-year-old black man, Anthony Lamar Smith. Stockley shot and killed Smith after a police chase over a suspected drug deal.
Hit him right now.
Stockley said he acted in self-defense and believed Smith was reaching for a gun in his car. The shooting was captured on police dash cam as well as an internal vehicle camera and a cell phone video. And I must warn you, it is graphic. Protesters, or prosecutors, I should say, accused the officer of planting a silver revolver to justify the shooting. Stockley's DNA was found on the gun. Smith's was not. CNN's Ryan Young live for us tonight in St. Louis. Ryan, I want to get right to the scene with you. What's the latest there? Describe what you're seeing.
Don, things are getting tense right now. For most of the day, it's been very peaceful, but right now you see the officers who are walking down telling everyone to move back. We were on scene just 20 minutes ago when someone threw a rock into a window of a house nearby. They were screaming for the person to come out. They were breaking those windows as we were filming. You hear the officers now giving the command, move back, move back. We've been marching about 4 miles this evening, all the way from the hospital through a business district and now into this residential area. They said all day they were going to come to the residential area. You see the officers right here who have been getting taunted the entire evening. What they did, though, is they allowed the protesters to sort of march wherever they wanted to march because it was remaining peaceful. Only a few times have we seen flare-ups, and this is one of the times that we've seen officers decide to spread into this area and tell everyone to move back. I want to tell you something else. You talked about the American flag being burned. When the American flag was being burned, a man inside a restaurant tried to confront the protesters. That's when we thought this thing was going to boil over. Cooler heads prevailed because people said that's not what we're here for. They continued the march. Then we got to this neighborhood. We marched up the street. Everything was peaceful. No one was touched. People were actually coming out from homes and kind of like going along with the protest. But then someone broke that window. And as you step forward, look at this. You can see the officers who are all now creating that phalanx. They're linking together. You can see the officers here in the riot gear, and they look like they brought more officers on this side. We also know the National Guard has been activated and is on standby just in case. Once again, this is all going down in the last 5 minutes or so when the tension started to rise. We also watched another young man be pepper sprayed, and people are carrying magnesium so they can kind of get it out of his eyes. But at this point, this is the most tense emotions that we have felt all night.
And it's, you can see, as you said, what you call the phalanx of officers there, and I'm looking at them. How much police presence and how many protesters on the scene?
Well, that's what we saw. The crowd swell to about 500 about an hour ago, and they started coming down Waterman Boulevard. This is a residential neighborhood. No one was confronting them. We had no kind of back and forth between residents or anyone else. It has remained peaceful. They found a house on the end of the street here. They went into the yard and they started banging on the door and they started calling for someone to come out. We believe it's a city official. Don't want to give whose house it is just yet because we're not even confirmed it yet. But then we watched them break the windows. Within about 10 minutes from that moment, we saw officers swarm the area. No lights and sirens. It just popped up out of nowhere. And then all of a sudden, we saw this. Now listen, they're saying move back. You can hear the officers moving. This is happening live right now, Don. So you can see people are starting to throw things at the officers. What we've seen mostly is they're throwing water bottles, and that's what they've been doing for most of the evening when they start moving this way. I'm going to walk up the hill here so I can get out of the officers' way. They have been dealing with being taunted, yelled at, cussed at for most of the evening, but they have not responded outside of using maybe the pepper spray every now and then. We've seen a couple of arrests. We know 12 arrests were made today. 4 officers were assaulted, according to the police. But outside of that, we haven't seen any other things that happen.
We can confirm.
So you hear the officer now telling us to move.
Yeah, you can confirm that that's the mayor's house, Lyda Crewson's house that those windows were broken on, Ryan. And just give our viewers an idea of where you are. Are you in Forest Park near the Central West End near Washington University? Where exactly are you in the city?
So what we did were we were on Euclid a little earlier, and there's a business district there, and a lot of the shops there were not even interfering with the protesters. People were actually providing water as they walked through. It was a very peaceful protest. This is a very mixed crowd, a very diverse sort of mixture of people. But then something sort of changed here in the last half hour or so. We've seen the crowd definitely change. Oh, here go people will start running again, Don. We've seen this several times tonight. I'm going to move out a little way. People are screaming gas, gas, gas. You can see some of the officers are putting their gas mask on, so you can tell they're probably getting ready to deploy some of their gas. We'll walk back just a little bit so maybe we can avoid being choked out by that gas. We've been so close to some of this pepper spray a few times, we've had to cover our faces with our shirts, but that is just part of the situation that's going on here. When you're throwing water bottles at police officers who have pepper spray, you know they're going to respond eventually. I can say, for the most part, we haven't seen them confronting the protesters. It's been more of allowing them to walk through these neighborhoods. And now, after breaking that window or breaking the law, that's when you saw the officers step in.
All right, Ryan Young, I want you to stand by. I also want you to be safe. We'll get back to you if the situation warrants it. I need to get to Dan Simon, though, also out in the crowd tonight in St. Louis. Dan, where are you and what's happening?
Well, hey, Don, it is an extremely tense situation. I'm about 50 yards away from police in full riot gear. We just saw the crowd just run down the street. This is normally a quiet residential street, and tonight it really looks like a militarized zone. I was actually in front of the mayor's house, which is about 2 blocks away from here, when those windows got shattered. We saw a group pick up some very large flagstones in front of the yard that are used for landscaping, and then they just smashed them into a bunch of different rocks. People picked them up and started smashing the windows. Then police came, and then obviously you see the situation now, but it was very peaceful earlier. You had people of all ages marching along, chanting various slogans. Everything seemed to be fine, and now the groups have seemed to splintered off a bit. Police have rushed in here, and now we're just waiting to see what happens, Don. But obviously this is the most tense we've seen the night.
Our Dan Simon, our Ryan Young, both out in that crowd of protesters. Initially, it was a peaceful protest, but now it is starting to look otherwise. We're going to continue on with these pictures and continue to follow this part of the story. And now we want to discuss why folks are out there. The former officer Jason Stockley speaking out tonight, telling the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, quote, "It feels like a burden has been lifted, but the burden of having to kill someone never really lifts. The taking of someone's life is the most significant thing one can do, and it is not done lightly." And going on to say, "I can feel for and I understand what the family is going through, and I know everyone wants someone to blame, but I'm just not the guy." I want to turn now to Anthony Gray, attorney for the mother of Anthony Lamar Smith. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You can see there's a tense situation going on in St. Louis right now. Your reaction to today's verdict?
Well, we were shocked, absolutely surprised. I sat there in that trial, Don, every day, watched it from gavel to gavel, saw Jason Stockley testify. His testimony was so inconsistent with what was on the cell phone video. And basically what this trial turned out to be was a situation where we were forced to believe what Jason Stockley had to say and suspend our own hearing, our own sight, and what we saw in that cell phone video. It was an absolute, in my opinion, it was an absolute embarrassment, and I think that he should have been found guilty of first-degree murder based on the evidence.
What do you make of his reaction tonight? He's speaking out to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I read part of it.
Now, I know, I heard you say that. I think it's a self-serving statement from someone who said he was going to kill someone, and 45 seconds later, he actually did it. It was premeditated murder. And all of his actions leading up to that point and subsequent to that point, I can't stress enough, Don, how it was caught on tape. It's totally inconsistent with his version of events. One lie after another lie after another, and the court chose to believe him. But as you can see from the demonstration, a lot of people chose not to believe him.
Listen, we met during the whole Ferguson unrest, and what do you say to those protesters out there, the protests who have, many of them have not been peaceful tonight, or some of them, I should say?
Fantastic.
Well, those that are not being peaceful, Don, they need to understand they're going to be held accountable. The system has a way of making sure that individuals involved in these kind of protests are held accountable. So they need to be careful and govern themselves accordingly, because they will be held accountable. And so they need to keep that in mind. That's my message to everyone.
You know, this happened in 2011, and a parent never gets over losing their child, no matter what the circumstances. And I'm sure this brings it back for the mother. How is Anthony's mother doing tonight?
Well, she's doing as best she can under the circumstances. I don't know how you, like you said, kind of digest this in any other way but through sorrow and grief. But under the circumstances, she still has a good spirit about herself. She hasn't resorted to doing anything that's out of the norm for her. I mean, she's containing herself. And so to the extent that she could manage to get through the day, she's been doing pretty good with that.
Yeah. You are in the courtroom every day, as you mentioned, and you say this moment proves the case for you, and we're watching it now. Explain that. What this moment? Explain that. And this is all the tape of the incident.
Yes, because those of us that saw it, Don, saw the tape, that is a cell phone video, and listened to the testimony, and are forced to believe that Anthony Lamar Smith DNA not being on his weapon after Jason Stockley testified to the way Lamar Smith handled this gun, how he had it in his hand the whole time, and how he apparently stuffed it in between the center console and the seat. All of this handling of this weapon and no DNA, I think is dispositive of the person who actually owned that weapon and put it there. His DNA has been compelling evidence against everybody except for Jason Stockley.
Anthony, I need to stand you by. Hold on 1 minute. I need to get back to CNN's Dan Simon live in the crowd. Dan, what do you have for us?
Well, we see that police just deployed what appears to be some tear gas. You can see the cloud off in the distance. You see all these people running away from the gas. You see the police in full riot gear coming down the street, trying to push this crowd back. We're going to move along a little bit so we don't get some of this gas. But what a situation, Don. It quickly spiraled out of control. Right after those rocks went through the mayor's house, that's when police decided that they had to act. For most of the evening, they kept a hands-off approach. But once the vandalism started, police had to come in and try to get this crowd under control. Now everybody's kind of dispersing. The organized protest is now effectively over, and now people are just sort of watching the scene unfold. As you see police come down the street, you see all these buses here. All these buses were used to transport police. We're going to continue walking down. But obviously a lot of tension. We saw protesters burning American flags tonight. And now we're just walking down the sidewalk. You see some of these protesters have masks on, and that's really what you have to watch out for. When they wear the masks, from experience, we know that they're up to no good. You can see now more gas has just been deployed. We're going to keep walking down. We're continuing to go down the street. Excuse me. We do have some security with us, Don, just so you know. We're trying to keep ourselves in a safe position, away from the chaos as much as we can be. And you hear the helicopters above, police helicopters, monitoring the situation. And now we're just going down the sidewalk. I can get a little bit of that gas now.
Yeah, Dan, I want you to stand by. I want to get back to Ryan Young. Ryan also live for us in the crowd in St. Louis. Ryan, take us to the scene. What are you seeing?
Yeah, Don, we're on the opposite side, and the officers are now moving our direction. They deployed that gas on the other side, and people on this side have been really taunting the police officers, trying to get them to kind of come at them Well, we've seen this all night, sort of throwing things at them or yelling at them. For the most part, the officers have stood back for most of the evening and have allowed protesters to protest. Once again, I almost want to say this is the protesters that worked in 3 phases. We've seen, here we go, they just deployed some of the gas and everyone started to run there, Don. One of the things that we've noticed here is we had some protesters who were doing it the way you think people should protest. Then you had other people who obviously were here to antagonize the police officers. They are screaming at them as we speak. You see the gas that's being deployed right now as we're talking. And you know how that wind shifts, Don. It will shift our direction, and that will disperse most of the crowd. I want to tell you, we haven't seen much of property damage, but it's obviously gotten to a point now where the officers want these people out of this neighborhood. There's been a lot of control this evening on both sides, but now you can see when those windows got broken down the way, we knew this was going to happen in terms of a heavy response. Once that helicopter above with the FLIR started lighting up the crowd, there were some people in the neighborhood here who were part of the protesters who were saying they wanted to do more than what was going on between them and the police officers. That was the first time we'd heard that all evening. Now you're at this point now where you see this, where the officers deployed a little bit of gas, you have a few people standing in front of them. That's a part of this conversation. The other time we had a flare was earlier this afternoon when the police were trying to move their bus in. We saw people, and that is the larger flashbang that they're now deploying. That has sent everyone running. So you can tell, oh, it just hit somebody right there. So somebody was hit with one of those devices. So now that gas is coming this direction. We're going to walk a little bit faster, Don, to get away from this. Clearly, the police officers are deploying things. I've got a young man throwing rocks to my right here now at the police officers. He tried to throw that rock. I'm not sure if it even got close to the police officer, but you understand what's now going on. This has sort of dissolved into a little bit of craziness, but as we move back down the street here, they've deployed gas even behind us. They are definitely trying to push people in front of them in a westward position. If you listen, you can hear the bangs in the background, and we believe that's police deploying more gas. In fact, there's gas behind us, and now there's gas in front of us, so we'll have to kind of figure out how to get around it. Notice, though, the crowd, some people are hanging around, some people are still taunting the police officers, but for the most part, the larger bulk of the crowd has gone home. One of the things that concerned me here is there were a lot of kids here at this protest. In fact, just in the last 5 minutes, I saw a 7-year-old who was standing over here in the corner. He was helping lead the protest, and now he's near all this that's going on. You would hope that someone who was his parent would get him home at this point because he's so young.
Ryan Young, stand by. Ryan Young on the streets of St. Louis for us this evening. I want to get back now to Anthony Gray, who is an attorney for the mother of Anthony Lamar Smith, the man who was shot by Officer Stockley. Does the family have a message tonight for these protesters?
Well, you know, Miss Annie Smith gave that message earlier, and it was a message of accountability. She also wanted everyone to remain safe. She put out a message of peace and calm as well. So that's been her message from the very beginning. There was a full expectation, Don, that you would have a public reaction in the fashion that we're witnessing right now. It was expected. I think the police should have been prepared for it. It sounds like they are prepared for it, given the amount of weapons and artillery that's being deployed at this moment. But Annie Smith's message has always been clear: to remain calm. Don't make one injustice into another injustice through civil unrest. That's been her message.
Well, I want to talk about the case a little bit more, because in his ruling, the St. Louis Circuit Judge Timothy Wilson wrote this. He said, "Finally, the court observes, based on its nearly 30 years on the bench, that an urban heroin dealer not in possession of a firearm would be an anomaly." What's your reaction to that?
You know, earlier I refused to give an on-air reaction, but after talking with Ms. Smith today, she urged me to say something about that. First of all, I don't think it was ever established that Mr. Smith was a heroin dealer. There was, I understand, heroin found in the vehicle, but that doesn't make you a dealer. The second part of that is that the possession of this weapon, it wasn't on him. It was allegedly in a car. Stuffed in between the seats that Jason Stockley just so happened to recover, that only has his DNA. Based on the judge's statement, you would think it would be on Anthony Lamar Smith himself, and it wasn't. I found the statement to be very interesting. A lot of people were offended by it. They took it as an insult and an indictment against anyone in possession of drugs. And what it also does, Don, which is more dangerous to me, it gives officers this kind of perception that anyone with heroin would potentially have a weapon on them now, and they need to guard themselves in a way that may not even be necessary. And it may cause more situations like this based on his 30 years of experience.
I know you want those protesters out there to remain peaceful, but you also say that you understand that the community is being asked to believe someone's words instead of trusting their own eyes. What do you think the lasting implications of this verdict will be on the police and the community and the relations there in St. Louis, a community that is already scarred?
I think you summed it up with your last statement. I think it's going to deepen the scar. It's going to make the divide even wider. We don't close any gaps with the outcome of today's decision, Don. I think the gaps become wider. We get more distrust. We get more, antagonism between the community and the police. I don't know what the answer is, but that's clearly what the results are, at least at this point. And you can see it with the protesting.
How do you respond to those who say, listen, this has been adjudicated, it's been played out in a court of law, a decision has been made, and people must respect this process and must respect the outcome instead of protesting on the streets for what some see as they don't understand why they're doing it because this is what the courts have decided?
Right. Well, I agree that you have to respect the process. You have to respect the outcome. But that don't mean I have to believe in what it was in terms of whether or not it was right or wrong. And what people are saying is that, okay, that's the outcome. Obviously, we have to live with it. Jason Stockley is not going to jail for murdering Anthony Lamar Smith. But that don't mean I have to accept it as right. And what I'm doing and what you're seeing right now and what I'm commenting on are individuals that feel like expressing it was wrong. This is not the way this outcome should have been, and I want to show you how I feel about it, and that's where civil unrest comes from.
Anthony Gray, thank you. We appreciate your time.
No problem, Don. You have a great day.
You as well. Thank you so much. I want to get back now. Let's go out to the streets of St. Louis right now, and you can see the protesters are still out on the streets. Our Dan Simon is out there as well. Dan, what are you seeing?
Well, hey, Don, it got a little tense there for a moment when police unloaded the tear gas. You can see police behind me in full riot gear trying to keep this crowd at bay. Clearly, they're just trying to disperse the crowd, trying to get them to go home. When we had this verdict today, there were immediate concerns and flashbacks to Ferguson, Missouri, just a short distance away from St. Louis. And the question was, would we see St. Louis erupt tonight? And police doing their best to try to keep things under control. We'll see how the night unfolds, but I will tell you that concern definitely exists. That's why the Missouri governor activated the National Guard. They're effectively on standby should things get out of control. We saw a number of businesses in downtown St. Louis board up their windows in anticipation that windows might be broken, that we might see some vandalism. And we've seen a little of that. Of course, we saw people break windows at the mayor's house. And ironically, the mayor came out today strongly and condemned the sentence. One might argue that she's on the side of these protesters because she felt that an injustice had been done, yet perhaps word had not gotten to these protesters that she had said that. So they went to her house tonight and broke some windows, did some vandalism. That's when police came in and effectively broke up the crowd. Now you see it kind of splintered a bit. We are at the intersection of Kings Highway and Waterman Boulevard, if you happen to know the St. Louis area. This is a sort of a quiet residential area. There are some businesses nearby. There's a hospital nearby as well. And for several hours tonight, the crowd, as you heard Ryan Young say, they were marching peacefully. Yeah, people of all ages. We've seen some young people, a lot of college students, some seniors as well. And now as the night wears on, can tell you that you're seeing more of a young crowd. You're seeing more of those people with masks on trying to hide their identities from police. Those, quite honestly, experience tells us those are the people you have to worry about because they're trying to keep their identities hidden. And oftentimes they have bags and they wear dark clothing. They have backpacks, and those are the people you want to keep an eye on, Don.
Yeah, and those are the people who are not necessarily representative of everyone in the crowd, and the people who are uninformed. Even though the mayor spoke out against the verdict, they don't know. I know exactly where you are. I lived there for a long time. You're right near Forest Park. Hospitals on one side, Washington University on the other side, an interstate, and then a neighborhood. But thank you. We'll get back to you. Dan Simon reporting to us live from St. Louis. And I need to just give you a note here. We invited the folks who represented this officer, Jason Stockley, to come on. They agreed to come on. But they could not come on tonight because they're dealing with the situation there. Also, they represent the officers, and they're dealing with the officers who are in the middle of this chaos. So not for any other reason. They can't join us just because they're busy, and we hope to get them on as well as soon as we can. When we come back, much more on the protest happening in St. Louis right now, and people out in force against a judge's not guilty verdict for the former officer who shot and killed a young black man.